All right, so let's give, I don't want to undersell Yes, but we are going to revisit other Yes albums down the road, so I can stretch bio if need be. Here's the basics for Yes.
Wait, you need numbers, John.
Oh, go. I'm sorry, numbers guy. I didn't mean to cut you out.
It's all good. It's all good, buddy. I got it. Number 60 in the 1970s, number 10 in 1971, 259 overall, and it did not make the Rolling Stone Top 500.
Oh, but number one in our hearts, right, Matt?
Sure, yeah. I'll go with that.
It didn't make the top 500.
It did not make the top 500. It's number 2. It's the second highest ranked Yes album on Best Ever Albums, so we're going to do Close to the Edge as well.
Yep. Yeah, we'll be doing that. So I'll probably not do the back end bio of Yes because we'll be doing that. So Yes was formed in 1968, and feel free, guys, to ask questions as we go along because I think some of our best stuff comes from that. The original lineup is singer John Anderson, bassist Chris Squire, not to be confused with Billy. Guitarist Peter Banks.
Stroke me.
Well done, Matt. Guitarist Peter Banks, keyboardist Tony Kaye, and drummer Bill Bruford. The lineup has evolved over the years and has included 19 unique members, guys, including none of the original members in the version that has been together since 2015 with the name Yes. So if you were to go see Yes right now, you would see a grand total of 0 members of either the original Yes or this version of Yes that we're going to talk about tonight, interestingly. One of the things that stood out to me is there's a lot of similarities with Yes and T-Rex, who I covered last week. They were kind of innovators of a style of music, in this case, Yes with prog rock. They became more popular in future years after releasing some albums which had a totally different sound. Yes did the same thing that T-Rex did. And they both made the decision to evolve into that sound in the year 1970, into an album that sort of prefaced it, and then like one of their masterpiece albums in 1971. So it's kind of amazing how much they line up with T-Rex in terms of their evolution.
They don't really sound the same, though, do they, John?
They do not. That's why I said there's similarities in terms of their narrative, but not their music sound.
Yeah.
You know? But if you just said glam for T-Rex and prog for Yes,
right,
the rest of the narrative holds.
Are they from Britain also?
They are. They are an English band. Yep. So the lineup that was on this album disbanded in 1981, and a brand new lineup was formed in 1983 with a couple members. I'll probably save that story for Closer to the Edge when we do that one. So
How is that even possible? Like the band, we have a band, it breaks up, and then other guys come in and become our band. Like that just seems so weird.
So Yes has kind of been like a concept as much as like a band rooted in like exact members. They seem to, almost every album they filter out a member of the group. It's almost, you want to talk about another throwback if we keep going it's kind of similar to what like Funkadelic was like, you know what I mean? Where that band, remember I said we did that Funkadelic album, and then by the time we were done there was one member left, 2 albums later. Yes has a little bit of that going for him, and that's kind of what's happened. But They were originally named because they were throwing out names. They had the idea of life or world, and then Peter Banks at one point said yes, and they just ran with that. That was what they said, and that's how they became Yes. Buford from the original band actually left to study at the University of Leeds at the beginning of 1969, but his replacement actually struggled to perform with the group, and so they brought him back into the fold in mid-1969 with that lineup that I talked about at the beginning. They actually played at Cream's farewell concert in November of 1969. They were the opener. So that original version of Yes, which is quite a bit different than this version we're going to talk about from Fragile, played that farewell concert. They saw King Crimson in 1969, liked the album, and it triggered their shift into a prog rock sound. Yeah, and they also decided, when hearing that, we probably need to become more technically proficient and rehearse more regularly. Because they were kind of doing it, I'm not going to say on the side, but they kind of admitted to themselves that they were going to go all in on being a band. So they did that. Their new sound led to a deal with Atlantic Records, and their debut album, Yes, was well received by critics. They then did a second album called Time in a World with the tried and true prog rock idea of a 20-piece orchestra. They must have seen King Crimson and said, So I've heard about this album in the Court of the Crimson King, and they did a similar thing with the orchestra, like King Crimson did, but they had a 20-piece orchestra. So Banks ends up actually leaving the group in April 1970 and is replaced by Steve Howe. So that's going to be lineup change number 1 for the original group to this album. Banks later said that he was actually fired by Squire and Anderson. And that the other 2 members of the group did not know what was happening. So they go into the studio and they're recording the Yes album, their 3rd album. It enters the US charts at number 40 and the UK charts, or I should say peaks at 40. And the UK charts actually gets to number 4, and then they go out and tour with Iron Butterfly. They then begin to do sessions for what would be this album, Fragile. And you're going to love this, guys. Tony Kaye, who is the second original member who does not make it to this album, chafed at wanting to play the Mellotron and the Moog synthesizer. He was not all about those 2 instruments, which is hilarious when you hear this album, because both of those are way in this album. He wanted to just do the piano and the Hammond organ, and the rest of them said, you either evolve or die. And they said, guess what, Tony Kaye? You're gonna not... And he was gone. And they placed a call to Rick Wakeman, who I think might be familiar to a lot of people listening to this, but he's a very, like, a musical savant who is well known for playing a variety of instruments, especially keys and electric instruments. He was in the Strawbs, a group with quite a cult following. Most notably, my father loves them, and among others, but they have a very loyal following. But he was in the Strawbs. He'd left it, and he was basically working as an in-demand studio musician. He gets offered the Yes gig on, you can't even make this up, on the same day that he was offered the ability to join David Bowie's band, shortly before, David Bowie becomes, David Bowie in terms of space, oddity. And he actually chooses the Yes gig because he felt it would give him greater creative freedom, which is kind of funny. And so Fragile, they go back into the studio, and Rick Wakeman obviously becomes a big piece of this. And it is released on November 26th, 1971. I believe it was the day after Thanksgiving, and reached number 7 in the UK and number 4 in the US. Notable also about this album is that 4 tracks are group compositions and also could be called the long songs on this album. Mm-hmm. And then the remaining 5 pieces are actually one of each of the 5 is a solo piece from each member of the band. So Squire has 1 piece, Anderson has 1, Bruford has 1, Wakeman has 1, and Howe has 1. So they're there. So Roundabout, Heart of the Sunrise, South Side of the Sky, and Long Distance Runaround are the 4 group compositions. So that is a little bit of Fragile by Yes. Matt, I'm going to start with you. How much did you love this album?
Pretty damn good. Yeah, this is awesome. I like this a lot. This sounds... the King Crimson is definitely in this. It's very King Crimson-y. I'm hearing Russian here. I'm hearing a little Genesis too, as well. So I definitely like prog rock. I didn't know any of these songs. So this was a brand new
Not even Roundabout?
Not even Roundabout.
Oh,
nope.
Wow.
Nope. Didn't.
I feel like Roundabout was always on classic rock stations.
And Guitar Hero.
and I know they played that when they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which I saw, but I didn't remember. It just was there, right? So, but I mean, I don't say a lot of prog rock because I don't know a ton of prog rock. It's mostly Genesis, but it's similar to the Genesis songs in that it's got these long songs, as John mentioned. 4 in particular, or 3 or 4.
They're kind of
3 are long. There's another group composition that's more like in the 3-minute range.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So there are certainly centerpieces to the album, and then you've got what some could be called throwaway songs, right? Or just or filler. They're not bad. It's not what makes this album, right? Like Cans and Brahms. It's like a combination of like a classical piece that with like it done in like one of Josh's favorite genres, which is the carnival, calliope kind of sounding thing. It's kind of weird.
That is the Wakeman piece, by the way.
Yeah, that was
and good news for you, it is a classical piece by Johannes Brahms. So there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. So I've heard of that guy, I think. And then one of them was actually, I think we've seen, I was hearing some Captain Beefheart a la Trout Mask replica with 5% for Nothing sounded like a Captain Beefheart, thing that was on there. It was just this odd, kind of drumming.
35 seconds.
35 seconds and then it's out. But there's some
That is Bruford's piece, by the way, the drummer.
Okay.
So, yeah.
But there's some really cool parts to this. Really liked Roundabout. I thought the standout for me was, one of the standouts was The Fish. I really thought that instrumental piece was super cool. Like just the way that, a lot of offbeats, a lot of kind of like different rhythms. It's moving things around. At the foundation, it's got this really cool guitar part. The bass kicks in. Very interesting song. And Heart of the Sunrise, I'm almost mad at them because there's that bass part from about the 30-second mark to the 2-minute mark. That is
bass.
My favorite part of this album. As soon as
you clearly liked Squire because The Fish was his piece, and then Heart of the Sunrise,
and he's the bass player, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Yes. That's the other thing. The bass stands out. The bass is very upfront here, and they talk about the crazy instrumentation and the musicianship of that. It's very noticeable and it's very good. But there's that really cool part of the Heart of the Sunrise. And then they kind of stop and they go back into the kind of the King Crimson, crazy frantic jamming, and then it goes into a totally different direction. But I wish that they held on to that more. That they did more with that because that's like a 10.5-minute long song, and that one part I think lasts just a minute and a half.
You want to hear something funny, by the way? There's two very well-known covers of that song by exactly who you'd imagine would cover it: LCD Sound System and Dream Theater.
Okay,
so, yeah.
Dream Theater.
Wow.
That's the impossible song to play on Rock Band, right?
You got it. Yep.
Yeah. But no, this is cool. Prog rock is always interesting. It's a little self-indulgent, but it's interesting, and I always find like the more I listen to this record, the more that I liked it. There's some really cool parts here, and I think Anderson's got a great voice. I think that's the other thing I'd like to say is that he's got a very, very high tenor that fits well. I think the only real complaint I have, while I do like the keyboard playing overall, I think that there's almost too many keyboard sounds. Some of them I really liked, and some of them seemed dated and not so. I didn't mind the music, the musical part that he was playing, but I felt that like maybe he could have done a different tone with the keyboards. Sometimes it was a little, I don't know, goofy, or it just didn't seem to fit right. And I would have liked to have seen a different tone there. But other than that, I really did like this album. This is kind of up my alley.
So you really respond to kind of the experimentation and variety that these prog rock albums bring.
Yes, and not just experimentation, because that you can't just do it for itself, but it's got to be grounded in something, and this certainly is. It finds some good grooves. It's got some cool guitar licks. Like Roundabout's got some kind of like almost Boston sounding, like AOR sounding like guitar parts. So it's got to be, there's got to be the melody or the intricate, or like the cool bass grooves or something like that. That I find appealing.
The bridges are very similar to long AOR songs. That's kind of what I noticed. That Roundabout has bridges that sound not exactly like, but the structure is similar to like Foreplay Long Time, right? You know what I mean? It's been such a long time. There's some similarities in terms of construction, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yep.
So, and all prog rock doesn't sound the same, which I think because yes, we're going to cover like Genesis and Rush, and they don't sound totally alike. They're in the prog rock genre, but they're very different. Yeah. All right. So if I was guessing that Matt loved this album, I'm going to guess Josh hated this album, but maybe I'm wrong. Josh, what are your thoughts?
Well, I didn't hate it. My thoughts and feelings are kind of the same as what the other prog rock we've listened to with King Crimson specifically, in that I can respect what they're trying to do, and I respond to parts of the songs and parts of the album, but as a whole, I can't. It doesn't work for me as a whole. I feel like they're, and this is kind of how I felt with King Crimson as well. They kind of seem to throw everything into the pot, and the result for me is just kind of too much paprika in the stew or something. And they have like really awesome opening guitar parts, specifically in South Side of the Sky, and then that bass line that Matt mentioned in Heart of the Sunrise. Like, I'm always really into those parts, and then it like shifts gears and transitions into like medieval sounding music, or Mood for a Day has like Spanish guitar sound to it, which is so things like that, or they throw in other classical music and completely like shift gears and sometimes even like stop and like transition into something completely different, and that just really throws me off kilter. It's also kind of similar to how I felt when we talked about the Pink Floyd albums too. I felt like there's always like potential there, but then something happens that kind of derails me from enjoying it. I thought the structure of the album was really interesting. I'm glad John brought up the fact that the long songs were the group, and then the individual compositions, which are much shorter, kind of in the middle. That makes a lot of sense, because I didn't understand why it was structured that way otherwise. It just seemed like, they want to do the long songs. Why not just do the long songs? But I can see that Yes is clearly more of an idea than and democratic in their approach to making music than some other bands. But yeah, I like I said, I guess to sum up, I can appreciate their desire to like fuse different genres of music together and create this potpourri or original mixture of things, but it just can't. I can't jam out enough to it, or there's something always missing for me, and it throws me off.
How many times did you listen to it, Josh?
Twice.
Yeah, for me, I this is music you got to listen to more, because it's one of those things that as you understand it more, what's coming next, you appreciate it more. It seems it tends to fit better, because you're right, they are throwing everything at you, right? And on the first listen, you're like, what is going on here? You can't really get grounded at anything. So to me, prog rock is something that you really, if you have the patience, right, it does require repeated listens to fully get, at least for me anyway. And that was certainly true with Genesis, because that's my favorite of the genre. But so I would say that if it probably would require more listens for you to more appreciate it more, I think.
Yeah.
So my take is it's sort of like, not in sound, but how I described listening to jazz, in that each of the 5 people in this album, I very clearly was able to see their contribution, almost to the point where it was like an ISO track. Like, this is a really good drumming album, probably an underappreciated one. There's good work here. It's a really good bass album. Steve Howe has some guitar licks that are real strong for a prog album in particular. And not that prog rock guitarists can't play, but they stood out for having a little bit more edge and heavy. Anderson's a good singer, and Rick Wakeman, whether you love key, I'm kind of neutral on prog rock keys, but whether it be Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or this, but you can't say he doesn't have talent, and you obviously immediately saw his imprint. And so from that end of things, I really enjoyed listening to the individual pieces and the virtuoso playing. And for the most part, I like the songs on this album. My criticism of this album, and it's my criticism a lot of times of prog rock, is that it's like math. It's very technical. It's very virtuoso playing / showy playing. I wouldn't say showing off, because it has a purpose. It seems a little bit cold to me, and a lot of prog rock is cold to me. It's almost stripping the edge or the feeling from the music, and instead you get sort of a technical homework assignment. And at times when I listened to this album, I was in equal parts appreciating how talented the people were and the fact that it sounded good, but it never took that jump into like an album that took that next level of investment in, because I didn't have an emotional connection to this music. Maybe some of that is because the sci-fi and the fantasy stuff is just not a genre where I feel connected to the music. Maybe it's because, as I've talked about before, like most great albums I have hit me in equal parts in my head, my heart, and my groin. You know what I mean? And this hits me in my head, but I don't know how much it hits me in my heart or my groin, right? You know, and so, and I think that's my takeaway from this. I liked this album because I appreciated the playing. And it's an album that I could listen to as many times as you asked me to and pick up different stuff like Matt said. But I don't think it will ever get beyond a certain point for me because I don't think it's designed to be an album that's designed to get inside me. It's designed more to show me a style of music. That's sort of my takeaway.
I understand that. And I can get why it seems like math. It doesn't go quite to that level for me, but it does seem like they're trying to recontextualize what music is in a way, or at least pop music or rock music.
Yeah. With that being said, I like this album quite a bit, and I like prog rock. I think it's just as we do albums, I'm going to be interested to see how many of them transcend that bar and hit me viscerally. Like I'll give you an example. Like I know plenty of Rush, but it's really when I think of the Rush that transcends it for me, I think of like Subdivisions, right? Which has an eerie sort of feel to it that gives me a connection beyond just the virtuoso playing of, you know, Geddy Lee on the bass and, you know, Neil Peart on the drums and Alec Lifeson on the guitar, right? It takes me up another level. Whereas there's some other stuff like, you know, X and Y and stuff that's like, wow, listen to this. But it's never like, this really speaks to me. It's more like, how about this? Like, this is like phenomenal. Like, it's like the calculus of music, you know? And I can appreciate that. But, you know, the limits on the calculus of music is that you don't really get inspired emotionally by calculus, you know?
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it, and I think you did a really good job of explaining that, because I see that, you know, and I don't think that this is my favorite genre. It's something that I really like, and I'm very glad that it's out there, and I think it definitely serves a purpose, and there's times where, like, this is one of the best things that I would want to listen to at a certain time. But yeah, it's very mathy, right? It is very technical, and it's just interesting how they're able to throw all these little bits that in the beginning you're just going, it makes no sense, right? But there is a structure to it. It's not like a jam band where it's just totally improv, right? All the stuff on here is written to be played the way that it's played. You know, there's intention behind that. And I think that that's a big difference between something like this that can seem like a long jam, but really is very much planned out, as opposed to like a Dead Jam or a Fish Jam or, you know, any one of those other bands. So it is kind of separate for me in that regard. And I totally get why this is not something that somebody would gravitate towards. It's very busy.
I wouldn't call what they do jams, because to me, jams is you stay with something for a long time, and part of what this is constant momentum and movement.
Yeah.
You know,
they don't even really call back to previous parts of songs. I can't.
Yeah, like in Roundabout, there's that one bar, like, you know, and that's about the only thing that repeats, right? But it always leads into something distinct afterwards. You know, something else that's interesting is this is one of my father's favorite bands, and I'm more of a logical, rational brain, and my dad's more of a like wears heart on the sleeve type guy. It does speak to him emotionally. Like Rick Wakeman's playing in the moment, like breaks that barrier into like, he just appreciates it so much and it speaks to him. So it's fascinating because he's a guy that you'd think the bar for that would be higher, but it gets there for him. And I'm a guy that the bar is kind of, you know, lower, you know what I mean? And it doesn't get there for me. And so that's why I don't want to generalize this, because I think there's plenty of people who this is going to speak to emotionally. Yeah. And, you know, the virtuoso nature of it might really I mean, it's like, you know, I joked about it as math, but there's a lot of people who get a lot of joy and emotional connection out of the creativity of doing high concept math. You know what I mean? And I don't want to compare yes to math, but I'm just saying it's, you know what I mean? I don't want to have my narrative. We joke about, you know, me always joking about people, but I am very clear. I want to say that I don't think that this is an album I think you should listen to, because I think it's almost impossible for someone not to appreciate what they're doing in this album, and it's relatively accessible for a prog rock album too, I would say.
Also,
Well,
it's
and I
not
think that there's
overly long.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, and I think that there's certainly, like I said, there's parts in here that I would say I do get emotions, like, you know, some of those bass lines, you know, the fish, you know, stands out as one of those different parts of Roundabout, different parts of South Side of the Sky's got a great, like, heavier kind of guitar riff in the beginning
part,
that I was feeling more viscerally, but then it takes you in a little bit of a different direction. You know, I'm not really there as much, but then they pick it up again, so it's kind of a little bit of an up and down roller coaster kind of thing. But I you know, I'm used to listening to this kind of stuff to a certain extent, so I definitely appreciate it and like just how unique and like I love different time signatures. I love offbeats, and that stuff is certainly here.
Yeah.
Anything else that your dad has to say about this, John? Is this like one of his? Would you say that this is one of his favorite bands?
It's one of his favorites, and I think it's because, I mean, while he realizes that Rick Wakeman's a little bit in the moment, I think he's still just awed by all the stuff that Rick Wakeman can do. You know, one comment that he made to me as we listened to this album, I was home for had a break, and so I went up to visit my folks for a couple days, and he said, you know, really at the end of the day, I like this album, but like to truly appreciate, yes, you have to see them live. And he said, you know, really that's prog rock in general too. They have these albums, but they're kind of made to be seen live. And even as I listen to this, while I like it and you seem to like it, you know, a fair amount too, it's only half of what watching it live is. And I can appreciate the limitations of what they're trying to do. And he would say, especially Rick Wakeman. So yeah, I agree with that comment as well.
They don't really, in their live shows, they don't really improvise though. It's just more of like the experience of seeing them play all the different things at the same time and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, it's just you see just how talented they are too, because you know, I don't know if you ever watched Rick Wakeman play the keys, but he's like flashing over he's got a huge setup, right? Like almost like Neil Peart drum level setup with the keys, and he's just flashing before all these different things. And they definitely do jam and go longer in those shows, but that's sort of the expectation of the audience too. They're not it's like a jam band, but in a different, like they're showing off more, whereas like a jam band is building, you know, the groove and the communal nature, you know.
Well, again, a jam band's going to be it's more improvisational. They're not going to do a ton of improv. My guess is you see Yes, and you're seeing them play Roundabout. They're playing the same song that you're hearing here. I don't think that they're going to go too much
they
off
expand.
Of that.
They expand,
Yeah?
and they do some improv, but it's a different type of improv. It's more built around, let me show you what I can do with these instruments. Whereas, like, you know, Fish and Grateful Dead, I think it's more about building, like, a vibe, if that makes sense, with some virtuoso playing, but, like, you're not going to have these long, showy, everybody, you know, because in some ways it's... You know, obviously the people doing it are not as much, but you know, when you go see a band and they go on the drums, and then somebody like pounds the drums and stuff, and then it's like that, but instead of them telling you it, they'll just build in pieces where they'll give a piece to each of the members of the band. So if you like that bass part, you know what I mean? They'll let Squire go a little bit long on a bass part they know is good. You know, that type stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
hey, they
all
have
right,
on the extended edition, they have a 10.5-minute version of Simon & Garfunkel's America.
Yes, my dad was very disappointed that was not on this album. He said, "Oh, that's the track you have to hear." So
Wow.
I did not listen to it this time. I promised him I would listen to it before we do. Yes,
It doesn't really sound like the Simon and Garfunkel version, I gotta say.
No.
It's a little different.
I would guess no. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did
So
your
it's
dad
got
have
the-
I know we keep coming back to your dad, but is this his favorite Yes album, or does he have another?
You know, I asked him that, and he said he wasn't sure what his favorite Yes album is because they kind of blend together for him, and he doesn't think of them as an album band. Whenever he thinks of Yes, he thinks of them in terms of watching live performances of them, seeing them live, and the totality of their catalog, if that makes sense.
Maybe it's because Rick Wakeman wears a cape when he plays, so that's got to be kind of cool looking.
Yes, and he does often wear it. He's an interesting looking dude too.
All right.
So, all right. So, final thoughts here. Matt, I think it's safe to say you'd recommend.
Yep, absolutely.
Where do you stand, Josh? Would you recommend, slight recommend, not recommend? What would you say?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the middle. I say listen to this album. It's not like something I disliked listening to. But, it's going to be one of those things, I feel like you're going to know if you're into prog rock by listening to Yes.
It will certainly give you an inkling as to whether you'll want to go further into it. I do want to say, though, that because we're going to be doing Genesis and Rush, some other stuff, sometimes we just tab something as a genre. Like, remember that the Moody Blues and King Crimson were prog rock, and some people think some of Pink Floyd is as well. And I would argue that while this calls back to King Crimson a lot, it doesn't call back nearly as much to like the Moody Blues, for example. And so there's different variations of prog rock. Yeah.